Hello and welcome everyone to Pixelatil 2020. Today we are extremely happy and extremely honored to have what we believe is one of the great colors and one of the great legends in this animation industry. With us, Director of Photography, Tristan Oliver. Welcome Tristan, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And first I just wanted to start off. You've been working with some of the great animation directors of our time, from Nick Park, Wes Anderson, most recently with Eric Ullman. So can you talk a little bit about this amazing journey you've been through as a director of photography and animation?
Sure. I mean, I always say that no one in their right mind would choose this as a career. And, you know, it's such a specialized niche thing to do. You know, when I started out as a cinematographer when I was in my 20s, you know, I wanted to make live action movies. Everyone wants to make live action movies. And then I got an opportunity completely by chance to work at Aardman. And Aardman then was 5 people, 6 people, and you know, we were working out of a garage, and I suddenly realized this was something that I enjoyed, but it was also something I was good at. And I don't know why, but you know, something about that way of working was very attractive to me. So, you know, within a very short time, Aardman had become quite a substantial force artistically. It was still quite small, but you know, people were sort of coming to them saying, do this, do this. And we started maybe 5 years after I began working with them with Wrong Trousers and working with Nick Park. So that was you know, the first movie that Nick had made that involved a lot of other people. You know, it's a properly crude movie that was for broadcast, you know, and so we were trying to create something that was bigger than the TV. We were trying to create something that was all about filling a bigger screen. And animation, stop frame animation at this point, really in the UK and I think in the States as well, was very much about kids' TV series. And a substantial force artistically. It was still quite small, but you know, people were sort of coming to them saying, do this, do this. And we started maybe 5 years after I began working with them with Wrong Trousers and working with Nick Park. So that was you know, the first movie that Nick had made that involved a lot of other people. You know, it's sort of properly crude movie that was for broadcast, you know, and so we were trying to create something that was bigger than the TV. We were trying to create something that was all about filling a bigger screen. And animation, stop frame animation at this point, really in the UK and I think in the States as well, was very much about kids' TV series. And you know, it was very good, it was very funny, you know, quirky stuff, but it was basically just flat lit, put the camera up in front of it and let the animator work for 4 or 5 days, come back in, unload the camera, off you go again. So there was no real art to the process. But what we wanted to do was to make it cinematic and to create something that was visually beautiful rather than something that was just about the animation. And this was something that Nick was very, you know, very on board with. And so we started to create this style, and you know, we made Wrong Trousers, and we made Close Shave, and then we got to a point where we were able to make a feature film, and DreamWorks came on board, and we got to make Chicken Run, which was the most fantastic opportunity. But that was the first full-length stop-frame feature film made in the UK. And it was only just after Nightmare Before Christmas had kicked off. So, you know, it was a kind of very kind of new process for us. And again, this question of how you make something that is visually engaging enough to fill a big screen in a big cinema And, you know, we had to completely rethink what we wanted to do, but that was exactly what we wanted, because, you know, we were driving forward this philosophy of beautiful photography, beautiful cinematography, you know, and getting all the gear in, and suddenly we had the money to do that, which was great. And how you move the camera through space, which was very important to us, and just how you make things look so right, so appropriate to the characters and to the story, that the audience forgets they're watching animation. And that's the key, because if you are aware of the process of animation, then you are not engaged in the story. And so we needed to create that, so that within the first few seconds, as you know, once you'd gone, oh wow, it's animated, you know, after that it just became a film that you wanted to watch. And the fact that it was animated was a separate thing. That was just the medium of expression. But we weren't being compromised, if you like, by the animation. And so there were lots of things that we had to reinvent, you know, because conventionally animation is all about the puppet. And so, you know, you always have to have light on the puppet's face, and, you know, it's very kind of artificial thing, you know. It's just the animator always wants the puppet to be the center of attention. But actually, you know, in a live action movie, a character moves through the environment. And that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to create a beautiful space in which to put the animation. And that was very different from what had come before, which was basically animation somewhere. You know, who cares? There's a chair there and there's a hill there, and that's all you need. There's a tree, you know, so what? So we created a world, and that also meant learning to work with very talented production designers and art directors who were building that world. And so we kind of grew up, if you like. You know, we were quite young guys and girls, and we kind of grew up together and created that language for that. And so I did those 3 movies with Nick, and then we did Curse of the Were-Rabbit, and Curse of the Were-Rabbit won an Academy Award. But by that point, I was quite saturated, if you like, in the Aardman style, and I hadn't really done anything else, and I was looking to move to something else, you know, because if you do the same thing, even at a very high level, you know, you realize that you're not using your mind, because the Aardman style is very specific. It's very good, but it's very specific, and so it's like going into the same office every day and sitting at the same desk. So I wanted to move on from that. So Aardman and I sort of gently parted company. It was all very amicable, you know, it just sort of went away. And I then got an opportunity to work with Wes Anderson, and that was a radically different way of working, because I had come from an environment where every single person absolutely understood the process of stop frame animation, because we had kind of invented it. And suddenly you're working with a director who knows how to make movies, but he's never made a stop frame movie. So that was a very steep learning curve for both us and for Wes, because he was working with a language that was based on what he did in live action, and we didn't know what was going on. So, you know, it was astonishing, and I confess at times extremely frustrating, because we just didn't understand how to get what he had in his head onto the screen, because it was so contrary to all the normal ways we had of working. But in actual fact, that was a very good thing, because it forced us into a way of thinking that changed the look. You know, and those Wes Anderson movies are drastically, significantly different from Aardman movies in terms of how they look. You know, and working with that big, highly symmetrical framing, big wide lenses, very carefully placed structures within the landscape. I often equate working with Wes Anderson to being very similar to reading a children's picture book. So you turn a page and you're presented with a beautiful illustration, and your eye travels all around the frame. There might be something in the top right-hand corner that is visually interesting, and your eye goes there, and then your eye goes here, and then it goes to what's happening on the screen. So he creates something more akin to a painting or a drawing, and then you turn the page and you have another image, but that image doesn't necessarily cut perfectly from the image before, but it works. And he's not afraid to just put things in the frame because he likes the idea of it, even if from a continuity point of view they're completely wrong. So it's actually, although frustrating, it's a very refreshing and a new way of working. So so that was great. So we had Fantastic Mr. Fox, and it was, as I say, a big learning curve, and we came off the back of that and we were absolutely exhausted. And then luckily, very quickly after that, I got an offer to go to Leica to shoot Paranorman. Yeah. And I was working with a director I'd known for years, Sam Fell, and a new director, Chris Butler, who had written the movie. And Sam was supporting Chris through the process of directing. So if you like, it was like the older director helping the newer director, and they had a very good relationship, those two. But the most fantastic thing about that movie was that they let me do what I wanted to do, which never happens, So with Wes, you work within a very, very constrained process. So every texture, every color, every placement, every angle is all via Wes. He in his mind, he knows exactly what he wants. And with Nick, it's a little bit different, but you're working within the house style of Aardman. But on Paranorman, I did what I normally do with directors, which is I put together a reel of images and clips from other movies, and I sat with them, I talked to them, and I said, this is the sort of thing I'm thinking about for this is what I'm thinking about for this, this is my idea of the palette of the movie or the mood of the movie. And they just said, do it. So I went from Fantastic Mr. Fox, which was a film that was largely orange and yellow, shot on very wide lenses, very symmetrical, to a movie that was shot on very long lenses, very wide apertures, with a huge amount of depth to it, huge amount of shape and contrast in the lighting and in the framing. It was a completely different thing, and it was it was like, I don't know, cleansing yourself of one thing and sort of going on to the other thing. So that was great. So I found the process of working with different directors very interesting, and I've always, no matter how frustrating or annoying it is at the time, I think when you finish, everyone gets tired on a movie because they're enormous, these damn things. They run for 18 months shooting, and it's like 55, 60 hours a week, and your whole life just becomes that movie and nothing else, which I'm sure if you're in the animation industry, is ridiculous. And on Sunday you buy your groceries and you wash your clothes, and that's it. And then Monday morning you're back in. So it's very easy to get tired and frustrated with the process. But in hindsight, you can turn around and look back at it and go, yeah, I understand now why that process was like it was, and I very much feel that with Wes. And then on when we did Isle of Dogs, because the majority of the key crew had worked with him before, we knew exactly what that experience was going to be like, and because of that, Isle of Dogs was a much more coherent, more communicative process. Because we weren't searching for a way, we knew what the way was. Okay. And so that became something different. But I think all credit to Wes that he never lets go of his sensibility, and he is proof of what I was talking about with cinematography and animation, is that he doesn't want to let his style be compromised by the animation. He wants to be able to do what he did in Grand Budapest Hotel in Isle of Dogs. And he's not interested in my saying to him, I don't think we can do that because of the physics. He'll just say, well, show me why you can't do that. And I'll show him, and he'll go, well, that's nearly what I want, so let's just see where we can go with that, and you end up doing stuff you never thought you could do. So it's kind of freeing in that respect. Okay, that's that question.
And can you talk a little bit about what's been like some of your most recent experience, maybe with Harry Folman?
Yeah, sure. So last year, 2019, was a very interesting year because it was a year where I did a number of movies, either in whole or in part. And I met Ari Folman, who did Waltz with Bashir and The Congress. I met him about 6 years ago, and he's a delightful man. I don't know if you've met him, but he is larger than life. He's got the earrings and the medallion, and he's very friendly, and he gives you a big hug like this. He's a very Israeli guy. And he said, I've got this film, you know what this film is about? It's about the fucking Holocaust. So I immediately loved him. He's a really great guy, same age as me, same age kids, so we got on really well. But he had this idea to make this movie of Anne Frank, and we did some tests for him, and I'll send you some stills from those tests. And the first test we did was using model backgrounds, and we built the interior of a radio, of an old valve radio. And we built these huge glass valves, and we lit them, and we did lots of motion control stuff over this beautiful set, absolutely fabulous looking set. And then they put 2D animated characters inside that magical environment. But he was very keen to try and make that movie as a stop frame movie. So then about 10 months later, we went back again and we did another test, which was fully stop frame, which was absolutely beautiful. And we built this 1930s Dutch railway carriage with Anne sitting in it with her family as they were being taken to the camps. Again, lots of motion control, beautiful puppets. Puppets were fantastic, and it looked great. And then, what always happens is they take that material away and they try and raise money for it. And it just proved very difficult to raise the money for that movie, for that stop frame movie. So then it kind of vanished, and I didn't know what had happened to it. And then last year, Ari called me and he said, "Okay, we've got some money. We can do this now, but we're going to have to do the initial approach, which is to do the 3D sets, and then we'll put 2D animation into that." And they didn't even have the money to do the whole movie as sets. So it was very small budget. Everything was getting very tight European co-production. Everyone puts in $10 and everyone wants $1 million worth back. But we built these beautiful sets, which were the interior of the Anne Frank, of her father's factory, where they hid. They hid there for 3.5, 4 years. So we built these rooms. And the thing was, these rooms were always blacked out because they were hiding. So we had these completely dark interiors with very, very little light inside. So I lit the whole thing with the practical fixtures. So we had these tiny little reading lights and little bulbs. And I didn't put any additional light in at all. Just lit the whole thing with these tiny bulbs. Sets looked absolutely fantastic. And we spent a couple of months just shooting loads and loads and loads of plates, which they've now taken back, and they're now doing the 2D on top of that. But I was really pleased that we got to do it eventually, because I think it's a story worth telling. And also I really like Ari. He's a great guy. And he and we hope we're going to go to Mongolia and make a film about horses, which is going to be very different.
Sounds fantastic, though.
Yeah. Exactly. So that was great. And I also did, we did some model unit stuff last year on the French Dispatch, which is Wes's latest film. And he's integrated a lot of miniature stuff into the movie, which is kind of seamlessly hidden away. So there's a lot of set extensions, and there's a lot of sort of little set piece. There's a printing works which has been built, which is only 2 meters wide. So we were shooting all these bits and pieces to slot into the French Dispatch, but the release of that has been held up now. And also last year I did a movie with the Dutch National Ballet, which was shooting live action dancers who are then dropped into a 2D fantasy world. So I've got one project with 2D animation in a real world and one with real people in a 2D world. So that was last year. It was fun. It was a great year. Lots of fun stuff.
Amazing.
Okay, I have a question. How do you manage to do the job of an administrator? How do you become from an artist to an administrator, from controlling every frame to controlling about 40 or 60 units of picture photography in a production?
Yes, I would like to say that I administrate in an artistic way. So on an average movie, you're right, we have between 40 and 50 units. On Paranorman, I had 56 units, which was a huge number. And I like to light. I like to do my job as a cinematographer. So I will personally be hands-on lighting, maybe 15 to 18 of those units. So that is one big chunk of work that I'm doing on a daily basis. And then I have 2 or 3 other guys who light for me. So I am constantly giving them notes and looking at what they're doing. So they'll shoot some test footage, we'll go into the theatre and we'll watch it projected and I will give them notes. So artistically, I'm across the whole picture. There's nothing is shot that I don't see and that isn't being driven by my vision, the director's vision, the production designer's vision. You know, nothing kind of escapes to happen on its own. Like, no one gets to make their own little film over there without my seeing it. And this is a problem on some big stop frame movies, I know. I think it's something Corpse Bride suffers from, actually. I think I always say I could cut that film into each of the people who shot it. I could give you the shots that were done. But for me, that film needs to look like one hand made it, one hand shot it, and that's my hand. So I'm very, very strict with the people who work for me. But the process of keeping all that in your head is just overwhelming. And when I was on Paranorman, I would wake up in the morning, and as I was getting out of bed, I would be numbering off in my head the sets, you know, set 1, that's okay, that's shooting, set 2, that's turning around, set 3, I have to program motion control, set 4, you know, blah, 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 all the way up to 56. And I would get in early. I used to go in at 7:30 a.m. and watch the previous day's footage on my own with the projectionist, just so I had that time just to think about what was happening. And then the main crew, the directors, would come in at 8 and we would watch it again, and then we would talk about what needed to be done for the day. And then we would go onto the studio floor and I would start giving notes to people. And I would catch up with my first assistant at around 11 o'clock, and we would have a cup of coffee and we talk through what we were doing. So all through the day there's that process of just checking in and making sure you know what's coming. But it was also necessary, especially with that movie actually, to have a timetable, not just of what was being shot but what it looked like, because that movie is very much about the time of day. You know, the sun goes down and the zombies come out. So all the way through the first half of the film, the time of day is just ticking down very slightly. So I always needed to know whether it was 4 p.m. or 4:15 p.m. or 4:30 p.m. And there was a color change that we had working through the movie. So I had all that mapped out on the wall of my office, so I knew at any one point what time of day it was, what was happening with the sky, because there were lots of effects in the sky that happened as well, and also what the overall mood of the movie was. You know, so was that little boy feeling lonely? Was he feeling happy? Was he feeling scared? You know, because all that fed into the look, and we had some little tricks in that movie that sort of reflected how Norman was. You know, he was, at the beginning, he's a very lonely little kid on his own. Everyone thinks he's a weirdo. And I'd seen a movie with Sam Fell, with one of the directors, called George Washington, which was a live action movie about these kids kicking around in the summer holidays in the States. And a lot of it was shot with swing tilt lenses, which enables you to control the plane of focus in a very kind of funky way. And we looked at using that for Norman when he went to school, just in order to isolate him from the environment. So we had a whole sequence in there. It's only about 12, 15 shots, where we were using these swing tilt lenses just to bend his focus of his world into a way that was a little bit different. And those lenses, there was a kind of fashion for using those lenses, so we didn't want it to appear as if we'd consciously done it. You know, again, this is this thing of not being aware of the process, but just being aware it's slightly different. So there was that. And then also, you know, what we have now on a lot of these movies is there's a huge VFX input into this stuff. You know, when I first started at Aardman, all the backgrounds were painted. So we had these guys, these fantastically talented guys, who would come in and paint these beautiful skies. On Chicken Run, every sky you see is a huge painting, which are 20, 30 meters wide sometimes. And these guys were superbly talented, but there's very few of them about, and now they're all old or dead. So you know, there are fewer and fewer of them, and they're also very, very expensive now. It's a lost art, and what happened, of course, is that then green screen came along. So everyone wants green screen, and green screen is a horrible thing. It's really horrible, because you have to imagine what's there. If you put in a beautiful painting, huge painting, and you light it so it looks like a fantastic sunset, all the light bouncing off that painting is absolutely right, and the feeling of the ambience in the image is exactly as it should be. So you put a key light up and you say, right, that's the sun, and this is the ambient light around it, and it looks absolutely right. As soon as you put a green screen in, all bets are off. So you have to light the green screen, but you have to light the green screen in such a way that it doesn't reflect green onto the set. And then you lose all the ambient light from the artwork that was there. So then you have to have some idea of what that sky should look like. So you make a guess at that, and you put the ambient lighting in a different way. And then you find at some point that the directors change their mind about the time of day, and the sky that goes into that green screen is not the sky you lit for. And so that's enormously frustrating. So I like to get on board with the VFX department as early as possible. So it used to be me and the production designer, and now it's me and the production designer and the VFX supervisor, so that I know what's coming, and I can give them what they need to make their job easier, but also I know what they're doing. And for me, the joy of stop frame is that it is handmade. You know, you can very easily do this sort of stuff in the computer. You can fake it, but there's something about a prop or a puppet that has been made by somebody's hand and painted by somebody's hand that brings life to what you're doing. And so if you rely too heavily on VFX to fix stuff, you lose that handmade quality, and the coherence of what you're trying to produce visually becomes confused. I think, you know, you often see kind of set extensions that have obviously been made in the computer in stop frame, and it's not that they shouldn't be made in the computer, it's that what they're making should more closely resemble the foreground which has been made with a paintbrush and a saw and a hammer and a screwdriver, in order to keep everything tied together in a realistic way. And we spend a lot of time on this in Paranorman, which has a huge amount of VFX in it. But Chris and Sam, the directors, and myself, we very much wanted all those effects to look as if they had been hand animated. And so all the effects in the sky, we actually used bridal veil, net, the sort of thing brides wear over their faces. And we took hundreds and hundreds of reference photographs of that, and they scanned it and put it into the computer. And so all those computer-generated clouds are actually sampled real material. They're not just a sampled algorithm within the computer where you press a button and it goes cloud, or waves, or hair, and all that organic stuff. It's actually sampled from something tangible and real in order to give coherence to what you're doing. And again, this is all about this philosophy of making sure that you're not seeing things on the screen that distract you from the story. It has to be a believable world, even if everyone has one eye bigger than the other and one leg shorter than the other. Everything within that world needs to work for that, and then you believe it.
And in that regard, was it somewhat so what do you prefer? Because I can also imagine that when you started, it could get frustrating, working, just dealing with the technology and these hot lights over these materials that might have some tendency to shrink. You also have to deal with the cameras themselves, lighting that wasn't made for this kind of scale. And then on the other end, you're dealing with VFX, you're dealing with directors like Wes Anderson that like to do the practical effects in camera. So kind of what has been the evolution of trying to deal with the technology and the tools around to bring your vision into the screen?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting question. I mean, to some extent, we kind of invented it as we went along. And a lot of those things that Wes wanted was stuff we'd done 20 years ago, but we stopped doing it because we'd found a better way of doing it, or what we thought was a better way of doing it. But he wanted to go back to that very handmade way, carving pieces of soap to make flames and using cotton wool to make fire. It's basic stuff, and we had kind of abandoned that as a process. I mean, in terms of tech, when I started, we were shooting on 35mm. So we were using cameras that were the size, relative to the set, they were the size of a truck. So if you've got a basic room set that is maybe 1.5 meters square, a 35mm camera is that big. So you're putting that inside the set, and then you're lighting it, and then the animator has to get in. So where does the animator go? So we just had to learn, the animator, you've got to keep the animators on your side, because they, I often say the art department builds what we shoot. And we set it all up, and then we send the animator in there to animate it, and you have to be kind to them. You can't cook them, you can't freeze them, and you can't make them uncomfortable. It's a physically very demanding role to animate, because you're constantly slightly bent forward from the waist. Your lower back goes, your hips go, your knees go, your ankles go, your elbows go. After a day's animating, these guys come out and they're like old men, they're old women, they're creaking, so you have to make it as comfortable as possible, and sometimes that does mean making compromises in how you do stuff. I mean, one of the great advantages of shooting animation is that your shutter speed can be almost as long as you like, which means that you don't necessarily need a huge amount of hot light. You can use smaller stuff, or you can use lights further away, because you can compensate for the exposure by using a very long shutter speed. So, things like that. But basically, if the animator can't get in, you're not going to get the shot. Or you might get the shot, but it's not going to be the best shot you could get. Now, more recently, of course, we've switched to digital. And because we are only taking one frame at a time, we use digital stills cameras. And we've been shooting full frame digital for the last 15 years. Full frame is just coming into the live action world now. It's the new big thing, folks. But we've been shooting full frame for 15 years, and it's a great thing. The cameras are now this big, so they're still as big as the characters. If you're shooting a human, imagine if the camera was the size of the human. So they're still big, but they're not as big as they used to be. Yeah. The digital route has given us a number of advantages. I think it's also compromised us in some way. It is a truth to say that it takes just as long to shoot a movie now digitally as it used to shoot on 35mm. We shot Chicken Run in 72 weeks, and we shot Isle of Dogs in 78 weeks. So it doesn't speed the process up. It just makes it's a different way of working.
Right.
It enables you, because you see what you have immediately, it enables you to move on. But because of that, it's more of a fragmented process. So traditionally, when you shoot on film, at the end of the day, you send your film off, it goes to the laboratory, and you get it back the next day, and you look at everything in one go, and then you shoot for the whole day. But digitally, every few minutes, someone finishes a shot, and the director and the DP and whatever and the editor have to go and have a look at it and make a decision whether to move on. So that happens then, and then you go into a pre-production meeting, and halfway through someone else finishes, so then everything has to stop and you have to go and have a look in. So you're constantly stopping to look at stuff because it's immediately available, whereas on film you have to wait for it. And so you get a fuller working day working on film. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but you do. But anyway, they're smaller cameras. We've got much better motion control now, much cheaper motion control. We buy a lot of stuff from China that is a tenth of the price we were paying 10 years ago. You can just buy it off the shelf. I have a guy who builds motion control stuff for me, and we can, on a movie, we can have 10, 15 motion control rigs where we used to have 3 or 4. And it's super lightweight, and that ability to move the camera through space is a great contributor to this cinematic look, because you believe that you're looking at something organic. The camera pans and tilts and glides through space, and it reveals the world in real time. So the camera isn't stuck just looking, and it works. It just gives it more fluidity and more cinematic chops, I think, to have the ability to move the camera. Sometimes you just want to look, but sometimes you want to move. And so that has really helped. And just the whole process of being networked, being able to go to any computer terminal on the studio floor and pull up any piece of footage that we've shot and look at it. If I'm setting up a shot that cuts with something I shot a couple of weeks ago, I can immediately access that data and look at it, and all the notes associated with that, and all the metadata on the digital files that tells me what lens I used, without having to go back through paperwork. So that's fantastic. I mean, in terms of lighting, that's another thing. Again, the film lighting industry still caters for live action primarily. So we've always had to look for solutions ourselves. And we used to use a lot of low voltage stuff. We now use a lot of LEDs. We use a huge number of LEDs. The reasons being that they're a much better color now, so you can actually get proper tungsten colored LEDs and daylight colored LEDs. They're vanishingly cheap, and they don't give out any heat, so there's all kinds of problems when you're using incandescent miniature bulbs, with things catching fire and stuff like that. But sometimes we do still use tungsten. In the theatre in Isle of Dogs, in that big red dome, all those paper lanterns have actually got car brake lights inside them. So those are just 12-volt bulbs that you put in your car. Because when you dim a tungsten light, you get a quality and a warmth to it that it's very hard to get with an LED. That said, we also use a lot of very big lights in stop frame. The reason being that if you're shooting an exterior and you want it to look realistic, the bigger the lens on the light, the bigger the diameter of the lens on the light, the more coherent the light is. So the light, if you imagine a small light, if you want that to be the sun, the beam of light coming out of that small light does this. So if you've got people standing on the ground, the shadows all run in different directions. So you've got one shadow running that way, one shadow running that way, one shadow running that way. So you immediately give away the fact that you've got a small light. Whereas if you use a big light, the spread on the light is reduced. So all those shadows pull back together. You do get a tiny bit of spread, but it's nowhere near as much as you get with a small light. So, you know, people always say, oh, I don't know why you use such big lights. And actually, I don't need the brightness of the light, but I do need the size of the light. And because of that, I often use big 10K, 12K lights that have got sort of 20-inch, 24-inch, what is that, 60-centimeter lenses, for the quality of the light they give out. And those big single source lights are not yet something that has been duplicated as an LED source. I think the industry is still struggling to make an LED that makes an effective sun, if you like, an effective daylight look. LEDs are very useful for big flat lighting and for tiny lighting, but for the wide outdoors we still use big tungsten stuff, and yes, it does get hot, but we try and reduce that as much as possible.
Amazing. And sorry, I just wanted to comment that it's kind of crazy to think that not so long ago, it's amazing how, you know, people were using stuff like Lunchbox and just to kind of get a sense of quick, some just to maybe replace the dailies, just get some quick sense of what is going on. And even though the technology is going, it seems like it's going ahead. It's just new challenges.
I can beat your Lunchbox, because when I started, we were using a tape-based system, a Sony EOS tape-based system, which was low-band U-matic, and you had to set this little editing desk up, and then you hit tape, and it would rewind the tape a bit, and then it would start the tape running, and when the tape got up to speed, it would take one frame and then it would stop, and then you could look at it and you could flick it through a frame at a time, and it was all incredibly low resolution because it was just running off the video tap on the film camera. So that was all the animator had, and they also had a single frame grabber, so they could compare one frame with the live image on a slider. And we were just buying those from the local hi-fi shop, because Panasonic made this thing that was basically a sound mixing desk, but it had one vision channel on it. So we just used to tape over all the sound sliders, and this one channel you could flick between a live image and a stored image. And then we went over to a thing called VAR, which worked on a Commodore gaming computer. And that was great, but then Commodore went bust, and so that vanished. And then for years there were all these different kind of systems, and finally, thank God, Dragonframe came. And Dragonframe was a massive global game changer in terms of what we do. I mean, it's the single most important thing that has happened to stop frame ever, I think.
Yeah.
Except for the invention of plasticine. But you know, as a tool, it's so valuable to us. It's so valuable. You know, the ability to run your animation, your cinematography, your motion control, all your sound, all your lighting changes off one piece of software on a common timeline is absolutely astonishing. So, yeah, I don't know how we ever managed without it.
I think we can all agree that we've come a really long way.
Yeah.
And you were mentioning that working with directors such as Wes has pushed you to do things that you didn't think were possible. So what do you think the future holds for stop motion?
Well, I hope it's very healthy at the moment, because there's a lot of movies going on. So we have Pinocchio shooting at the moment, which is very exciting. And there's a new Henry Selick movie in production. There's a new Chicken Run movie in pre-production. And I think Leica I know Leica are going into production with their 6th movie. So we have the potential for 4 stop frame movies, and those are just the ones from the big companies right now. And then you've got the smaller stuff like My Life as a Courgette. I think they've got another movie in pre-production, and that's good. I mean, I think producers and studios are nervous of stop frame because they think it's expensive, but actually it is cheaper than a big CG movie. If you look at something like Toy Story 4, I mean that cost $130 million or something extraordinary. I've never worked on a movie that cost more than 50. So it is economical to make. I think one problem it does have is that it doesn't get such a huge audience. It has a good fan base. And then you can add to that fan base if you're working with Wes, so you get your animation fan base and your Wes fan base, but it doesn't make huge numbers at the box office. And I think there's a perception that it's a little bit too clever, a little bit too, what's the word I want? It's not, there's no slapstick in there, it has a level of craft to it which can override the story, and I was always appalled that Madagascar made $680 million at the box office, and Curse the Were-Rabbit made about 95. I could never work out why that was, but the answer actually is that quite a lot of people don't really like watching stop frame, and I think a lot of kids get a bit freaked out by it, and yeah, it's difficult. But anyway, we keep on making them, and also, thank God for Netflix, who are now bankrolling several of these big projects, which is fantastic. So yeah, it's pretty healthy at the moment. It's too healthy actually, because there's not enough people out there who do it well. I always think there's about 2.5 crews worth of people, so you can make 2.5 movies at any one time, and then you start having to look around for other people who aren't quite as good, and then so that's 3 movies, and then you get up to 4 movies, and you're just thinking, who are we going to use? So it's tricky. It's tricky. Yeah. And then you start ringing people you would never ring ever.
Yeah, that can happen. But I think it's also developing new talent. I think, especially through shorts and maybe in other countries like Mexico and Latin America that are starting to jump into bigger productions.
Yeah. You've just had a stop frame movie in Mexico, haven't you? Is that right?
There's actually 2 in production, which
really?
is kind of crazy to think, for the same reasons,
Yeah.
Kind of shifting the talent between productions has become one of the bigger deals. But I think we're very excited because there is definitely talent, and I think right now they're in the same process that a lot of the major studios and movies and talent were a couple of years ago, trying to figure out how to get it started, how to, I think once it starts rolling, we should start to see every time more and more quality. So yeah.
Yeah.
And I was curious, what do you think are some interesting directors out there that you think should be making stop motion and haven't thought maybe about making a stop frame movie, but they should?
Oh, that's a tricky question. Wow. I don't know. What about the Wachowskis? Do you think they should make a stop frame movie? I worked with Dorota Kobiela on a movie called Loving Vincent. I don't know whether you've seen that. And I shot that movie as a live action movie, and then they took it away and they painted it. So it's good. I think she's a great talent, actually, and I would love to work with her again, and I would love to do a stop motion movie with her because I think she's got a very good eye. I mentored a young director at the National Film School here called Daisy Jacobs, who made a film that I've completely forgotten the title of. It won a BAFTA and it was nominated for an Academy Award, but she made a short animated movie and then she made another one. And I think she's a great talent. And I think, you need to want to make a stop frame movie or an animated movie, because as a director, unless you understand the timescale and what it involves, it can be incredibly frustrating. I can imagine no one conceiving that a shoot would take 18 months. You absolutely need to sign up for that time. Which is what Wes did. God bless him. He got that absolutely right. He buried himself in those projects. And if he was working on other stuff, which I know he was, we didn't know about it. I mean, he managed to write the script for French Dispatch whilst we were shooting Isle of Dogs, but he was available to us from 8 a.m. until 9 p.m. every night. So I don't know how he did it, but he did. I just think there's a lot of good stories out there that could be told in stop frame rather than in computer-based animation, rather than in 2D or 3D. I think it's... The great thing about stop frame is what you put in front of the camera is what you get. And if you make it beautifully, if you make a beautiful puppet or a beautiful prop, and you take a picture of it, you've got it, Whereas in computer-based animation, you always have the opportunity to just add to it and render it again, add to it and render it again, And there is a limitation because of render time. Quite often due to the schedule, there's a limitation on the quality you can get because you haven't got the render time, you haven't got the processing to get it right up to the quality you want. But because stop frame is essentially just live action with dolls, if you like, you can get it as good as you want. It's right there. You take the picture and you've got it.
So thank you very much, Tristan. This has been an absolute pleasure. We want to thank you so much to opening up to the Mexican and Latin public that attend and the global public that attend Pixelatl 2020. We hope that post-COVID you are involved in a lot more really amazing projects because we absolutely love your work. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. It's been a blast.
Well, thank you so much. Muchas gracias a todos por acompañarnos el día de hoy. Muchas gracias, Tere. Muchas gracias, Tristan. Nos vemos en la próxima. Hasta luego.